Join our knowledgeable hosts as they dive into the captivating universe of comic books, movies, TV shows, and pop culture. Get ready for vibrant discussions and a shared enthusiasm for all things superhero and beyond. A comic podcast straight from the panels. This is Beyond the Capes.
All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Cape podcast. With us today is Kyle Higgins. You have definitely seen his work at your local LCS, Radiant Black, completely dominating a lot of the comic book this summer, at least for us. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Ryan and Alex.
All right, so, well, first, I guess, congratulations. I know you had surgery not too long ago. How are you recovering from that?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, it's, I've had a few over the last couple years. This is actually my sixth in 6 years. So it feels like I think I've literally done one a year since 2018. Or maybe there was a year where there was two or something like that. But yeah, it's another cartilage transplant. So I'm still in a big brace and not supposed to be walking on it without crutches. I'm walking a little bit on it without crutches. Recovery's going well. So I'll most likely still be doing San Diego this year, later this month, in a brace and crutches. And I think we've got a motorized scooter as well.
Ooh, that'll be awesome.
So
Yeah.
Well, awesome is one way of looking at it. Super annoying is another way. And
yes, being in surgery.
Yeah, exactly. So, but if this really is the corner that I'm finally turning on it all, like, one more round of inconvenience is not, I can do that standing on my head. So.
Awesome. Well, I guess then we'll start things off. Now you've been in the industry for quite a while. You put out a lot of work. If anyone goes through your bibliography, so where did this all start? I mean, like, was this always the goal? Like, did you just, as a kid, you got into comics early and you just were a writer, or was it something you kind of developed or found out later on?
No, I mean, I've read comics for pretty much my whole life. I really found them though through some of the other media that existed in the late 80s and early 90s, centering on superheroes. So, Batman the Animated Series, X-Men the Animated Series, the Ninja Turtles cartoon, Burton's Batman, Richard Donner's Superman and Superman 2, things like that. And then very quickly you realize, well, that's kind of the list. And if you want more, they come out monthly as comic books, and these stories about these heroes and other characters. And also, I guess I should include Spider-Man the Animated Series in there as well.
Yes.
And then
Great show.
All the Bruce Timm stuff, all the Superman stuff, Batman Beyond, of course. I was a little older by that point, but so I started reading monthly comics. Actually, the poster that's behind me right now is from issue 1 of the Chuck Dixon, Scott McDaniel Nightwing run from 1996. And that was the first series that I actually was buying monthly. I think I was about 11 at that point, 11 years old. And prior to that series, I was buying whatever I could find in grocery stores, or spinner racks around, in drugstores, things like that. With rare exception, we didn't really go into comic book stores when I was growing up. We didn't really have any nearby. And then as I got a little older, did realize, like, oh, no, there are a few that, I was able to ask my parents to bring me to kind of on a regular basis. But the Nightwing series in particular was one where I remember being at the grocery store and it was issue 16, I think, was my first issue, or maybe 14. I think 14, I missed 15, and then 16, I read everything from then on. And it was like a low enough number where I was like, oh, I could read all of this. Like, I could
get into the series,
and everything. Yeah, so that was kind of like, that was a big gateway series for me. as far as like, monthly releases and things like that. So, but yeah, I mean, it wasn't ever, comics weren't really ever something that I wanted or thought I could do, save for a period. I mean, I grew up, I drew all the time, but never at a level that, I ever had any like delusions of being able to potentially do it professionally or anything like that. And I made movies. I made little short films with my dad and my sister from the time I was like, 7, 8 years old. So save for like a little brief period in high school where I thought, oh, maybe I could try to do, maybe I could do comics or at least do it on my own. And I drew a handful of pages and like colored them with Prismacolors and things like that. It wasn't something I ever really considered. And then in college, I directed a film that was my senior thesis film that I also co-wrote with Alex Siegel called The League, which was about a superhero labor union of 1960 Chicago. And it became the basis eventually of our first book at Image called Cowl, which is also now a part of the Massiverse, and a series that 10 years later we are actually on the verge of bringing back. I'm like, we're literally going to the printer with issue number 1 of the return. It's called Cowl 1964. It's a 4-issue miniseries that wraps up the original story that we started 10 years ago, but also like kind of sets a new course for how Cowl factors into the Massiverse and things like that. But we're going to the printer with it on Monday. So
Awesome.
It's yeah. But that film became something of a calling card for me, and it was the piece that Joe Quesada, the then editor-in-chief at Marvel, saw and reached out to me about, and we started talking, and he teed me up to senior editorial, and I pitched for about a year, about 20 or so different stories, different one-shots, before landing a Captain America Theater of War comic that Alec and I then co-wrote, and that was my first comic book. And then from there, they offer you something else. You pitch a bunch of stuff. You land a miniseries. Then DC heard you landed a miniseries, so they're more interested in you. And you kind of go back and forth a little bit, and ultimately I ended up landing at DC for about 4 or 5 years, doing all the New 52 stuff, Nightwing, Batman Beyond, Batman Eternal, Deathstroke, like all that material. So,
now being kind of when you were in that the New 52 was crazy because when we talk about C2E2 for us when it started back in 2011,
I was there.
Blackest Night was like the headlining event for that event, and the New 52 for DC that launched. That's where we met Joe Quesada, and that tells you how long ago that was in comic history. What was it like?
Well, Blackest Night would have been earlier than that. Blackest Night was like 08, 09.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They waited.
It was 09. It was July of 09.
That's
I'm
right.
not sure why they chose that at the first C2E2, but it was, and I was happy about it because Geoff Johns completely shocked.
I'm pretty sure the first C2E2 was 2009. I think it was.
I thought it was 2011.
I don't think so.
I think it was
the 15th anniversary this year.
I think it was 2010 actually. I actually have the first cover of C2E2 because it was Alex Ross.
It probably is 2010.
Yeah. I think it was 2010 actually. Yeah.
Now I'm gonna
thank God for Google.
It was 2010. It was April 16th of 2010. Yeah. See, I don't know about that because I remember being there. Oh, no. It was 2010 because April of 2011. I mean, I've been to every year of it. April of 2011 was the first time I met Dan DiDio properly. But I was already doing work at DC, and I was working on. I had written Deathstroke #1 for the New 52, but we were all under like very strict NDAs, and like no one knew who else was working on stuff. They kept us all pretty siloed early on, And so it was before I was writing Nightwing. I landed the Deathstroke relaunch for the New 52, and so I remember seeing Dan at the convention and saying hi and introducing myself. And I was like, "Well, I'm working on a thing." He's like, "What are you who are you?" I told him I was like, "I'm doing Deathstroke." He's like, "Oh my God, yeah, how are you?" And then spent as Dan does. He very very gregarious and charming, and spent a lot of the weekend with him talking about comics and career stuff, and put me on my first panel there. Actually, he had me just join impromptu. No, it was impromptu. He had me join a DC panel or a Batman panel. It was one or the other, and so I think Snyder was on it too. I'm pretty sure.
Oh man, yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
So what was it like? I mean, you started off in comics, and now you were kind of a part of the New 52, which, I mean, really kind of changed the landscape during that time. DC essentially rewrote their entire universe, and I personally loved it. I think it made a really strong connection. They took kind of what they did really well in the past and gave it a lot more modern. I know there's some people that would argue with me about that, but that's neither here nor there.
I think it depends on your definition of modern.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sensibility during the New 52 that was really kind of rooted in the 90s in some ways, and it made sense. It makes sense when you think about who was, kind of driving the bus a lot of the time behind the scenes, and Bob Harris was the editor-in-chief at that point. He kind of most famously was the editor-in-chief at Marvel, but the X-Men editor for Jim Lee and Chris Claremont's run, and that whole era of the 90s with Scott Lobdell and Fabian Nicieza and all that stuff. So there was quite a bit of that sensibility that was around. I have kind of I've complicated. It makes it sound worse than I mean it. I have complicated feelings around the New 52. In the broader sense, I feel like that in some ways, it did change things, but I don't know that it necessarily changed things for the better as far as the landscape in the comics industry goes. It definitely created an influx point for lapsed readers or new readers even. It was accessible mostly. New number ones for the first time in 70 years in some cases, but at the same time, there was a lot of throwing the baby out with the bathwater. There was a lot of confusion.
Yeah.
I wrote Nightwing and Deathstroke for 8 months concurrently, and I couldn't have them meet because I couldn't figure out if they knew each other. Scott Lobdell writes Teen Titans #1 saying this is the first version of the Teen Titans that's ever existed. And then meanwhile, the Batman office and the Green Lantern office are acting like all of the previous years of decades of continuity still stands, And so it became this little bit of a tricky magic trick to figure out how to tell something new that's not reliant on the old, which by the way, I'm a big proponent of regardless. But in the case of Nightwing, a lot of his kind of defining stuff does involve the larger DCU.
Yeah.
At the very least, the Teen Titans stuff and everything. And so it's like, okay, if you take that out, you really have to kind of rethink some things. But I would say more without getting into the weeds on it all. Part of the complicated feelings I have about it, separate from how chaotic it was working in that era and being a new writer and a young writer, just trying to figure out how to be consistent, much less walk this tightrope act of different interests and mandates and things like that. I feel like in some ways it strip mined the future for the short term gains.
Yeah.
And so you got a big boon to the line and a big sales increase and everything with rebooting and doing new #1s, but I also feel like it broke the illusion of you know, kind of a longer running continuity.
Yeah.
And again, I don't like continuity in a lot of cases, and I feel like it's a crutch. But from a reading standpoint, we've now been through how many eras of new number ones at DC, and Marvel has
Correct.
its own problem in that regard as well.
Yeah.
And I do think it's created a little bit of a churn feeling where it just doesn't feel like things matter in the same way
Yeah.
as they used to. Because after the New 52, we had DCU, and then we had DC Rebirth, and then we had DC Infinite Frontier, and then we had, like there's a lot of, and a bunch of them had new number ones, and it's yes, I get it, like they bring in legacy numbering as well, but that's kind of like a half measure.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel like with things like the New 52, it's like if you're gonna reboot something, like it's kind of all or nothing. You either do it all in, or you don't. And I think Dan got that, I will say, but you do the best you can, both from a company standpoint, but also from a freelancer standpoint. And there's work in there that I'm definitely proud of.
Yeah.
There's a lot of work in there that I'm not, but I'm really happy that I got to work with my all-time favorite character, Nightwing, and he made me a better writer. So that's a relationship. I've said this before, but that's a relationship that very few people get to have with their favorite character, and that's something that I don't ever take for granted.
Definitely. And it sounds like it was a great learning experience because, I mean, if you look at like everything you've done, I mean, as we'll get into later in this podcast, I mean, Radiant Black is, I mean, like it's a really well-rounded story. I think me and Alex can both agree.
Oh yeah.
Like it's just from start to finish. Do you feel like kind of starting like into like all that fray kind of in the beginning really helped you kind of define like this is what I like doing, this is the process I would like to do if I was to write a book, kind of help you refine or at least get a kind of a rough idea of how you would maybe in the future want to go down the road of doing something?
I don't know. I don't know about that. I mean, I think it's easy to be revisionist in that way,
Yeah.
and point to stuff in that regard. But at the time, no. I mean, I always had bigger aspirations and kind of ideas of the type of creator I wanted to be. And also, for many years, like I resented my comic book career because I felt like I was pursuing it at the expense of what I really wanted to be doing, which was directing.
Yeah.
And that's a whole other thing to unpack, one day. But I definitely came to terms with it in a positive way and very much embrace and support it now. I very much embrace and accept it now and am very proud of it. But yeah, I'd be lying if I said like, I was looking at everything I was doing on the DC stuff and going like, well, one day if I create a universe, I mean, there are definitely things in there that I remember going through and kind of chalking up to like just kind of like clocking as like, okay, well, I wouldn't do that. Like, but not to any larger
Yeah.
end or a goal, if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it is true that like I look at that stuff and watching how certain creators navigated it, good and bad. Looking back on how I navigated some of it, good and bad. By the time I got to Power Rangers, I feel like I would not have been able to navigate that property and that book and all of the parties involved. I would not have been able to navigate that stuff had I not gone through the New 52 on some pretty high profile stuff. Nightwing was it was a big book and it was selling really well. So, it's there were definitely, by the time I got to Power Rangers, I was definitely aware of the fact that I told my editors back then on Power Rangers, it's like I wouldn't be able to do this and build it out like this had I not had my time at DC and the experiences I had. So, and then you can draw a straight line more or less from my time on Power Rangers to what we're doing now with the Massiverse. And so it's, yeah, it's funny how eras kind of take shape. Oftentimes when you're not even aware that you're transitioning eras, they can end up, in hindsight, you can look back and really see
like,
where
wow,
those moments of delineation happened.
Yeah, that's crazy. And then one final question before we start getting into kind of what we're working on now. Shout out from my local LCS that has stopped by today. They said to say hello. You may not remember them from C2E2, but they are Illinois comic book shop Beyond Tomorrow comics.
Awesome. Which did you have anything more specific from C2E2, or was it?
They said this last C2E2, I believe. Josh and oh man, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but they stopped by and they had a lot of things to talk about. And they brought up a good thing. This next year, is it possible, being that you do have that film director in you, that we might be getting a Radiant Black show and or movie?
Anything's possible. With absolutely nothing but respect for you guys. That's not something that I would announce on a podcast.
Yeah, of course.
No.
That would be something that you
San
guys
Diego.
would.
Hall H. I mean,
Well, I can
I
tell
see
you-
it. I see it.
Yeah, right. I can tell you definitively right now, we are not announcing a Radiant Black show or movie at San Diego this year. We've got some pretty cool announcements for San Diego, but that's not one of them, unfortunately. But maybe one day, you never know.
Awesome. All right. So obviously the reason we have you on the show, Radiant Black, like I said, you guys had a panel this year at C2E2 for the Massiverse. Everything you've been doing around Radiant Black, the Massiverse, and your other projects have just, like I said, it's really been blowing up. I think Radiant Black has been on most people's. It's on one of our recommendations for like top 10, top 5 comics to recommend to people to get into comics. How did you even come up, like Radiant Black, like getting the foundation started for this?
Well, I guess the not too long version of that answer, it does harken back to my time on Rangers. There were a couple things going on kind of all at the same time. I've spoken about this a little bit before. We did the live action promo short film for Shattered Grid. Jason David Frank and I put that all together. Jason even paid for the majority of it. And it was done for a couple reasons. One, Jason was starting to see a lot of fan interest in Lord Draken on the convention circuit. And so he would message me quite a bit telling me, like, hey, I think this character like really has a ton of potential, and people are always bringing up stuff for me to sign, with that character on the cover now. Like, it's really kind of like been invigorating. He's like, we got to do something. Like, we got to do a short. We got to do, whatever. And I would tell him, it's like, I get that, but like, like I'm writing the official book. Like, I can't just go off and make, a short film. And then I had an idea on how to do it and how to potentially design it as something that could be additive to the comics. It can stand on its own. It would be centered on the 25th anniversary, which we were entering into, but also do it in a way that would actually be, if you actually read all of Shattered Grid and watch the Hyperforce RPG Twitch stream and watch that short, they all work together. I designed them so that they do actually all work in the same, like it's all in universe. Like,
awesome. Yeah.
The short is designed to actually be scenes that take place in between sequences in issue 26 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. And so we did it. We made the big short, put it out. It definitely kind of took off. At the same time, I was talking with Saban, as was Jason, about doing potentially some stuff in live action. Jason had another project over the years with some people that they were pursuing as like a potential web series. At the same time, we had built out this idea of doing something in the world of the coinless, and we were talking with Saban about, potentially I had a way to do this as, basically as like a digital series, but because of that, it would be something that we could do as a SAG New Media deal and do the whole thing union and potentially even bring back former actors without setting precedent for the non-union TV show. So it was something that was exciting for multiple reasons. And, when Hasbro ended up buying the brand, everything kind of just got put on hold, and then ultimately they didn't pursue, any of it. And so I was wrapping up my time on the book at that point. And so I started thinking about like, well, could I build out a digital series that's kind of in the vein of this, but like something wholly original. And so I started building out this thing. We were calling it the working title was just calling it the Vanguard at the time. And then that actually turned into Radiant Black as a title. And I had the iconography of miniature black holes and this whole kind of like big pitch, which I should probably mention, all this material for the Vanguard, like all of it's actually in the Radiant Black year one hardcover that is coming out in, I think it's October.
Yeah, I think so.
So we're actually showing people it all for the first time. Like it's very, very different from what Radiant Black became. But I started designing it to be this 6-issue like comic series, a creator-owned series to do at Image. And while that was happening, I was also working on a pitch for one of my old editors at DC. And I won't say what it was just in case he ends up wanting to do something with it one day. But I built out an original thing that involved a character in his like late 20s getting laid off from Wayne Enterprises and having to move back in with his parents in the Gotham suburbs. And based on what they wanted this kind of pitch to the series to be, like that idea I came up with would kind of, if I could tell you what it was, like it would, you'd say, oh, right, like it kind of fits.
Yeah.
But ultimately I ended up not officially pitching on it. And I told him, because what the book needed to be wasn't something I wanted to write.
Yeah.
And so I just kind of set it aside. And so then right after New York Comic Con in 2019, Eric Stevenson, who's the publisher at Image, reached out to me and said, oh, by the way, he's like, have I ever talked to you about building an original superhero book? And I was like, what do you mean? And he said, well, not a Batman or a Superman analog, but like something original. Like think of it as optimistic sci-fi if you want. And something contemporary, And I said, oh man, I would kill to do something like that. But I never thought there'd be a market for it. And he thought there could be. And so I just started, I remember telling him on the spot, I was like, well, I have this thing, this Vanguard kind of thing that there's a bunch of stuff in there that I like. And I quickly realized, like, if I did it right now, and those aspects of, like, the other potential DC thing of, like, character who gets laid off, moving back in with his parents, like, I felt like I was touching on some things that felt very current. And so that's what I did. And I just pursued that path. The other thing Eric told me was that, I should feel free to mention this to any other creators I thought would be a fit. So I called Ryan Parrott immediately, and within 3 days he pitched me Rogue Sun. And Matt Groom was already doing Inferno Girl Red. I was the editor on that, and we had been working on that for some time, for months. Actually, I was trying to find an artist for it. And so at a certain point, right before, I think it was before Radiant Black 1 even came out, we knew what the numbers were, and we had this we all had this late night call with Michael Basuto, who edits and designs all our books in the Massiverse. And I kind of like I was really like excited because I could see it. And I pitched them all this idea of like, let's build out our own thing. And it's a corner of think of it as a corner of the Image superhero universe. And like, I don't know how many other creators Eric has talked to about this, but like Radiant Black is going to be the first out of the gate. Cause from the time Eric said it, I just like, that became the thing for me. I was like, I saw it. I just kind of like went all in on figuring out what this book would be. And then building this book through COVID kind of kept me as sane as anyone could be during that time. Yep. And I was just pitching the guys on like, if we don't do it, someone else will, and
yeah.
And so then we started figuring out how to do it and what a modern original universe could look like and what the tenets of that would be for us, including the fact that everyone's book needs to be its own thing. It's not built on anyone else's, IP in any way. And, I was adamant, like everyone pick their own city, set it in a place separate from everyone else. It allows you to build out your little world in your own way. And the books don't cross over, except for once a year when we do this, 50-page supermassive one-shot. We want this universe to be accessible. We don't want to be doing the 90s gag of like, a story where part 1's in this book and part 2's in this book and part 3's over here and part 4's, like we want this to be something where you only have to read what you like, basically. And that was a thing that Ryan and I got really good at on Power Rangers 2, especially during Shattered Grid, was like, I really prided myself on kind of like being able to thread the needle, honestly, the whole time on the book because of what the kind of requirements were of it, where it's like, it's in universe. It's all in universe of the show. It's all canon of the show. And it's like, is it? It's like, it's 2017. They all have cell phones. Like, is it? But, Saban very much wanted it to be. And so it became this thing about, I never described it as a reboot. I started describing it as a remix, and so it's like, if you squint, it all makes sense. It all fits. We're not invalidating things, but we're also not writing a book that is reliant on knowledge of the show, especially like episode by episode knowledge, for it to be a satisfying narrative experience. And so with Shattered Grid in particular, that was really tricky because there's a lot of Rangers at play. And Ryan was writing a series, Go-Go, that's set in the past of the Mighty Morphin timeline, but it needs to be a part of the event. So how do we do that? And that's where the Ranger Slayer stuff comes into play. But we want Go-Go to not break its reading experience for readers who are just reading that and not reading Mighty Morphin, and vice versa. And so it became this like, how do you build things that are additive without being fully necessary, but never unnecessary? You know? And that's kind of like the sweet spot that we try to find with the Massiverse and our supermassive one-shots and things like that. So
yeah, no, I think that's the best part about Radiant Black is that you can pick up, like, you don't feel almost overwhelmed, like I'm picking up an issue and I'm missing out on so much. One of the best things I think about Radiant Black that has gotten a little bit lost in some comic books, and I think that's why Alex really liked it when I told him to pick it up, is Nathan Burnett. Like, all of us in our 30s, like, it's just such a relatable character. I can't relate to Luke Cage. Like, I don't have, I can't be out in the sun or I'm going to sunburn. Nathan Burnett and his story, like, I completely understand where he comes from. Like that experience and that feeling, outside of getting a super suit, like, is very recognizable. I don't know if that was the intention, to really like give a character that everyone can kind of get behind, almost like a people's kind of character. But I really enjoyed that part of it.
I don't know about you. I personally prefer creating characters that are completely inaccessible. No. It's very by design. I mean, I like to say that, like, the book is not about me, but there's a lot of me in the book. Mm-hmm. I'm from Lockport, like, that's my hometown. A lot of it, especially the stuff with Nathan, is, me writing about stuff that terrifies me. And I have a lot of friends who are in LA or used to be in LA who have had to move out or some who've moved back home. I have friends that have had to do that even separate from LA. In 2016, I was going through some stuff and a bad breakup and went to Europe and did the most cliched, guy in his early 30s moves. And on the way back, I ended up staying with my parents in Illinois for 3 months. And really it was because I realized I'd left when I was, 18 for California or 20 for California. And every time I went back, I always thought well, one day when I have time, I'm going to come spend a big chunk of time here. And suddenly it's I didn't have anywhere to live back in LA. All my stuff was in storage, and it was well, I don't have anywhere I have to be right now. And so I just stayed. And so, while I never officially moved back home or anything, that period of time was very informative and influential for me, especially touching on some of these, everything from perceived failures and expectations in your 30s to just the reality of what it's like trying to make rent, and the fact that so many of us are in debt and none of us talk about it. And there's at least an age range of us that are, we could argue, or if not disillusioned millennials, borderline disillusioned millennials. And there's not to say there aren't plenty of other huge problems in the world for a whole host of people, but this is also stuff that a lot of people go through as well.
Definitely.
So I felt this is kind of the book where I want to talk about some of that stuff and touch on it and see if I can make it relatable and accessible, no matter what you do for a living or what your dreams were. And I also wanted to be something that I, in knock on wood and success, would be something that I would want and be able to write for at least 10 years. Kirkman likes to say you can't pick your hits, and that's totally true. But I also felt okay, if I do this right, this is a book that could grow and change with me over time. Assuming the characters don't all die in the Catalyst War. So
Anything's possible.
Yep.
Anything's possible.
One final question from me. I know Alex has a few. Obviously, Radiant Black is the main character, but we are introduced to quite a few other characters that do get their own suits. I mean, I want to say that obviously Nathan and Marshall are probably the primary focus. I mean, obviously they're kind of the main. Did you have a second favorite, or did you prefer possibly another character as you started making the story? That you're man, Nathan's great, but I really enjoyed writing for this character.
I really like Shift. Shift is great. Shift, I think there's a purity to Nathan and Marshall, even with Marshall's, extraness. There's a purity to Nathan and Marshall that I really like. Shift is kind of the opposite of that. Shift is in addition to writing the book, I also have a company now, Black Market Narrative, and so we're doing a ton of things, not only just creatively, but logistically, and also trying to figure out how to run a company and make it work is a whole other skill set and ball of wax. And Shift to me is that mid to late 30s cynicism about straight up cynicism about getting something for yourself, and there's a bit of that I relate to in some ways, and there's a speech that he gives in issue 16 to Marshall, trying to convince him to flip, that Joe Clark, one of my frequent collaborators, and he's co-writing the Catalyst War with me right now. Joe co-wrote issues 16 and 17 with me of Radiant Black. And there's a speech we did from Shift on the sales pitch is one of my favorite things that we've written. And it literally the origin stories for Shift are all designed around this central idea of like starting a small business, essentially. Like in his case, it's starting a small business as a freelancer, starting a small business in this kind of like supervillain, kind of modern supervillain variety. And so each story is like it's actually titled after a different like aspect of trying to run a company. Like I think the first one's called Founders Meeting, and then Launch Day, and then Working Capital, Off Brand, and I think the final chapter we did in the series of shorts was called Selling Out, and that was the one that's in between chapters of the Catalyst War, and that's how Shift ends up getting involved in the Catalyst War. But yeah, I'd say he's probably my favorite outside of the core Nathan and Marshall stuff in Radiant Black. Wendell's a lot of fun too, Radiant Yellow, and Satomi. Yeah, there's something I like in all of them, to be honest.
Yeah. Alex, I know you had a few questions.
Yeah, Kyle, like the style of all you heroes from Radiant Black, to all the other heroes. I mean, I just love it. Like they're very unique, something I haven't really seen before. Like how much input did you have in like their design, or was that just really like a huge collaboration between you and your artists? Can you just delve into that, just the style of their look?
Yeah, I mean, it was something that I was trying to find the right partner for this, and I felt like coming off of Power Rangers, both from a brand standpoint, but also from a creative standpoint, Tokusatsu was certainly an influence on not only Radiant Black but like our entire line here. I really kind of fell in love with more Toku towards the end of my time on Rangers. Like I was always aware of it, but it was really Matt Groom and Michael Basudel walking me through what the pilot to Jew Ranger was, and watching it and really going, oh, I get it. Like this is great. And then I kind of really fell down the rabbit hole of Kamen Rider, and Marvel was asking around the same time if I would have interest in building out Ultraman for Marvel and Subaraya. And so Matt came on, and Matt Groom and I do that together. But with all of that kind of around at the same time, it just kind of made sense that this kind of aesthetic influence, and there's more than just the aesthetic that is influenced. When I talk about the Tokusatsu influence, it's not just the aesthetic and the look. But when it was actually Eduardo Ferragato who recommended Marcelo, Marcelo had been coloring Eduardo for several years at that point. They were very good friends, and Eduardo drew Matt's first creator-owned book at Image called Self-Made, which I was the editor on. I put together and everything. And so Eduardo brought Marcelo in to color it, and we all went, who is this? Oh, my God. And Daphne Plebin, who was the Power Ranger editor at the time, I was showing her the book trying to get Matt some work, and she was like, yeah, but who is this colorist, And so she started hiring Marcelo to color some stuff towards the end of my Power Rangers run, including the Soul of the Dragon graphic novel that was like I think that was officially the last thing I did on the brand for comics. And Eduardo reminded me, he was like, Marcelo draws, and he's like, and he loves Super Sentai. And so Marcelo and I started talking, and we decided to just kind of let's just see if something could make sense here. And I've had a lot of success in the past with colorists who do their own interiors, their own sequentials. There's the right kind of colorist where, I shouldn't say right, but like there's a certain type of colorist where I feel like you can tell when they can really draw, how they work with light and shading and form and rendering. And Marcelo was very much one of those types of colorists. And previously Rod Reese, who was the colorist on my Nightwing run for the first 18 or so issues. Rod stopped coloring comics to come do Cowl with us, and that was his first book as a sequential artist. And now he does a ton of stuff at Marvel, bringing Cowl back. And so I wasn't afraid at all of like giving a shot to someone who hadn't done a ton of sequentials. It turns out Marcelo actually had done a ton of sequentials, but not in the States.
Yeah.
Right.
And so Marcelo can also adjust his style. So we were talking about finding the right style and doing something that's optimistic in the vein of what we were doing on Rangers. But we really decided, like, let's see if we can actually design this character first. Like, let's see if that's a fit for us, because Ryan Parrott said to me once years ago that he thought that like 90% of a character working, a new hero or villain in superhero stuff especially working, is the design. And I think he's wrong, because I think it's like 95% at least. And so Marcelo started doing some sketches. All of these are in the Radiant Black hardcover as well. And from his first round, it wasn't quite the direction. There wasn't anything quite, generic's the wrong word, because they weren't generic, but they were just like, you're trying to thread a needle, but you're not sure where the needle is, But there was some helmet designs he did that really sparked for me, and I was like, ooh, that could be really cool. And like this all black, you can kind of see one over my shoulder here, the Radiant Black helmet, but like that like almost obsidian black glass look.
Yeah.
And he had done some eyes, I think either in a visor or just eyes on it. And I remember telling him, like, I think this is the way to go, and I think those eyes should animate. Like, I want like big animated Spider-Man eyes, because I had just done 3 years on Power Rangers with like these fixed expression masks and not even an actor's performance in voice to help carry it. And it's like, oh my God, like after 30 some issues, it's like,
Give me something.
trying to get emotion out of these characters on the page was like really, really challenging. So I was like, I don't want to do that again. Like we're doing big animated Spider-Man eyes, they're energy eyes, And then when Marcelo nailed the suit design, that's when I felt very strongly like, okay, we've really got something here. Like this has a shot, And Eduardo describes him as like the iPhone of superheroes. Like he's like this very clean contemporary design, but also, when you reduce him down to that small, he reads. The silhouette's real strong, but also just like the shapes on the suit are very graphic, and they're not too busy. Like it's very kind of. I hate to throw around the term iconic, especially about my, something I'm involved, like my own stuff or our own stuff, but like that's what you're chasing. And I feel like Marcelo just, he nailed it.
Yeah, no, I definitely think that look just kind of stretches across. I think like when you talk about Radiant Black, like that suit image is what is really striking. Definitely think it's nailed. Before we go, I just want to thank you for coming on the show and answering our questions. What do we have to look forward to coming up?
Alex, was that your only one?
Yeah, we're that's my only one for right now, and we're hoping to have you back, for maybe a part 2 of this amazing discussion. So, I'll save it for our upcoming interview in the future. So.
Okay. I mean, I'm here now. Your call though. What's coming up? Well, we've got so the day we are recording this, Radiant Black 29 and 29.5 have officially landed on stands. We are working diligently here on Radiant Black 30 and 30.5, which is the end to the Catalyst War. On July 24th, Supermassive 2024 is going to be coming out. That's our Supermassive special for this year. It's also takes place during the Catalyst War and factors into the Catalyst War itself. So definitely recommend that to people. And then I believe in 2 weeks, a week from this Monday, which would be July 15th, is the final order cutoff date for Cowl 1964, our new 4-issue miniseries that we're doing in the Cowl line. We're also going to be going back to print on Volume 1 of Cowl, which has been out of print for the last couple years. So we're doing a new edition of that. We've got some fun adjustments we've made in the book as well. So it's kind of a little bit of a remastered edition. There's some pages in issue 4 of Cowl that Rod didn't draw. A wonderful artist named Stefan. I'm not sure how to say his last name, if it's Pergier or Perger. Drew back in the day, and so Rod has since gone in, and they're the only 6 pages in Cowl that Rod didn't do. So he's gone back and done those himself now. So we'll be running. It'll include those pages and brand new color edition of the cover, and it's really striking. So if you haven't read Cowl before, now is going to be a great time to jump on that. We've got Inferno Girl Red Book 2 in the works here. That'll be later this fall, we're hoping. And what else are we doing? Well, later this fall for Kickstarter backers, and then we'll talk about a mass market edition, most likely for next year. Awesome. And then I'm trying to think. We also have our big Massive Verse fighting card game that we've done in partnership with Soulless Game Studios. And this is a player versus player fighting card game featuring 8 characters from the Massiveverse. It's a 5 to 10 minute match. Everything you need to play a complete match comes in the box. 8 character decks. So show it for camera with art from throughout the book for all the different moves. We also have
awesome
character card art by the one and only Dan Mora.
Yes.
Lending his talents to the Massiveverse. So that'll be out, I believe it's October 8th. And that will also be in comic stores, is the plan here. So that's going to be in previews, I think. If not right now, then I think it is in previews right now. So that's coming up. We also are heading to San Diego Comic-Con this year. We're going to have a big Massiveverse booth right on the edge of Artist Alley. It's going to be booth number 4901. And it's a big, like I said, a big Massiveverse booth. We'll have like a 10-foot tall banner and everything. So we'll have some really cool special editions, limited editions of this year's Supermassive. Our gorgeous Tony Daniel variant cover done in a limited edition foil version. We also have some foil editions of the first 3 issues of No One that we'll have down there. Some gorgeous pins that Kelly McMahon has designed for us, including a new pin for Shift that will be dropping at San Diego. Some Tom Whalen limited screen prints for Radiant Black and Rogue Sun. And we'll be making a bunch of announcements at San Diego. So you want to stay tuned. Probably to our newsletter is the best place to make sure you're subscribed for all this stuff. We're trying to use social media less and less, but if you just go to blackmarket.la, you can sign up for the newsletter there. I'm actually working on a new edition right now that we're going to be hopefully putting out this evening about Radiant Black and Cowl, and this week's Rogue Sun, issue 20, is also out today. But yeah, I think that's pretty much everything right now. We'll have more to talk about after San Diego.
Definitely.
Perfect.
Well, thanks again for coming on and answering our questions. We got a lot coming out, so there's a lot to look forward to. We definitely can't wait to see what you announce at San Diego. Everyone, we hope you enjoyed the episode. You can listen to this wherever you get your podcast from. You can also watch it on YouTube. Follow us at Beyond the Cape at Instagram, and also follow our friend here, Kyle Higgins. I know you're on most of the social media, but your website is the best place then to find you for most up-to-date.
I would say for up-to-date stuff, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty like hit and miss on social media as far as posting. But the newsletter, the Black Market Narrative newsletter, is the best spot for all the up-to-date information, including one other thing I didn't mention. In addition to the Radiant Black Year 1 hardcover, which is officially called the Massive Edition, Book 1, collects Radiant Black issues 1 through 12, including a remastered issue 11. We are also doing a big audiobook starring Will Friedle and Ryder Strong as Marshall Ward and Nathan Burnett, respectively, respectively, I guess would be the term.
Yeah.
Right.
There's going to be a big, cool cast on this thing. We haven't announced anyone else yet. There may be some of that at San Diego. We'll see. But that's going to be coming up this fall. We're targeting November with that right now. And so you'll get more news and updates on that through the newsletter.
Awesome. Well, I know we can't wait to have it out. And then hopefully once these things start dropping, we can have you stop on by and we can get into more of your other projects. Again, thank you for your time and thank you for coming on and answering our questions. Everyone listening, have a good night.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.